friends. So glad that you've joined me today. It's your friend Howard Hoffman coming to you. Recently, I've had the privilege to join several prayer groups on Facebook. Wow, I want to tell you it's very cool because right now in this country, we sure do need a whole lot of prayer. And in fact, in just 2 days for this recording, there's going to be a national march or a gathering in Washington, D.C. to be praying 40 days before our upcoming election in this country, which will decide really many things. Well, in preparation for that prayer rally, I have a little story which will connect, I believe, very well. If you'll hold on, it's a brief story. I know I can tell a long story. This one's brief, though. It concerns someone that you just may not be familiar with. You may not be knowing of his name. His name was Dr. John Orr. He had passed away a few years back, but he was a very good man. He was a pastor, he was an evangelist, he was a songwriter, and he was one of the founders of a group called Campus Crusade for Christ. That's probably a little better than stocking the shelves at Walmart. But he also was a teacher at a seminary college called Wheaton. Maybe you've heard of that. It's still in existence today. And in 1940, Dr. Orr took a group of seminary students over to London, England, to visit some of the historical sites of the Protestant faith, things that would mean much to seminary students and their learning. One of those places that they visited was a place called the Epworth Rectory. It had been the former home of John Wesley, that great man of God I'm sure most of you have heard of. That Epworth Rectory is now a Methodist museum, and John Wesley's influence still lives on. His theology is taught and observed throughout much of the world. He was a very, very godly man. So the seminary students were very glad to be able to stop at his former home on this tour. Dr. Orr led them into the home, and they were able to observe the living room and the kitchen where food was prepared and eaten. But one of the great things that they were able to experience was the study, the library, where there were books that John Wesley himself had in his possession. And there were study notes where John Wesley had written things in his own handwriting. They were quite excited to see all of that. And actually, because there weren't any ropes around, they were actually able to touch those books, run their hands over them, touch the papers that John Wesley had written upon. Oh my, that was a pretty exciting time. And then Dr. Orr led them upstairs to a rather mundane place, a bedroom. For what can you really say about a bedroom? I mean, it has a bed, it has a dresser, it has a nightstand, and that's just about it, I guess you could say. But one student did notice something rather unusual in that bedroom. On the far side, beside of the bed, on the floor, in the carpet, there were two marks. And this young seminary student asked Dr. Orr, "What are these two markings on the floor?" And Dr. Orr told him, "Well, my dear friend, those are the knee marks where John Wesley prayed for hours upon end, asking God to bring about a reawakening, a revival throughout the world." And indeed, God did just that. Well, that was also a very nice experience. The students continued to look about the house, and that tour portion was over, so they were to depart and gather back on the bus. Dr. Orr stood at the head of the bus, counting off students, making sure he had not left any behind, when he noticed they were all there with the exception of one. So Dr. Orr said, "Well, we must move on, so I better retrieve that student." He went looking in the home. looked upon the usual places that you might expect to look, especially that study, that library where Wesley's books were. Certainly he would have found that student there, but no, that student was not there. He found him in an unusual place, possibly. That mundane place, the bedroom. As Dr. Orr entered, he could see the head of this young man on the far side of the bed. And as Dr. Orr walked around the bed to put his hand upon this man's shoulder to tell him that it was time to go, he noticed that the young man had his knees in those exact imprints that John Wesley had years before knelt. And a young Dr. Billy Graham, not a doctor yet, but yet a seminary student, was saying in fervent prayer, "Do it again, Lord. Could you do it again and let it begin with me?" Well, we know the rest of the story because God did let it begin. And Billy Graham influenced many, many millions for Christ. What a story. And we know the rest. Or do we? As Paul Harvey said, there's an important detail, and it, we may say, is the small rest of the story. You see, because 4 years before, 1936 to be exact, Dr. Orr had preached a revival in New Zealand. And upon the ending of that crusade, there were 4 Maori girls who came, and as a departing gift to Dr. Orr, sang him a Maorian farewell. It was an enchanting melody, and he was so enamored by it that he penned some godly words to it. And it was called Cleanse Me. You might not be familiar with that name title. The name was changed. But this particular song, Dr. Graham had heard, you see, because it had been 40 years since its writing, and it became rather popular rather quickly. And it's believed that this song so greatly influenced Dr. Graham that he knelt that day in fervent prayer in John Wesley's knee prints. I close with just a verse of that song. Let's listen here today. Search me, O God, and know my heart today. Try me, O Savior, know my thoughts, I pray. See if there be some wicked way in me. Cleanse me from every sin and set me free. Maybe today, as we close, you can individually think of God, think of our country, think of the things that are going on, thinking about how revival is needed and how hopefully we are willing to say, "Do it again, Lord. Let it begin with me." Remember the words of this song, and indeed, let God set us free. Be blessed, my friends. Ever look to Him. Have a wonderful day.